Is that he was only 25 years old at the time that he was selected, and this was his very first solo project. So he did pretty good for a first try. He grew to create quite the impact on architecture here in Victoria. So he's responsible for this building, the Empress Hotel that's just across the street, the old steamship terminal, and then if you're walking down Government Street, Irish Times Pub and the Bank of Montreal, both of those buildings were designed by Rattenbury as well. Now the construction of the building itself, it took 4 years, from 1893 till 1897, and then it opened its doors to the public in February of 1898, which makes it 127 years old. Then it was pretty stagnant for a while until the year 1912, and that is when they added the massive library to the back of the building. So this addition, it was massive. It actually cost almost the same amount as the initial build itself, so it's pretty cool. Do we have any questions so far? Brilliant. Now I have another question for you, a little Canada pop quiz. So my question is, does anyone know how many provinces we have here in Canada?
10.
10, yes. And how many territories?
3.
3, I heard it whisper, yeah. So we've got 10 provinces and 3 territories, and each of them will have their very own personalized coat of arms like you see behind me. So we'll talk a bit about what makes this unique to British Columbia. So down here at the bottom, we've got our provincial flower. Does anyone know what it is? It's a tricky one. It's called the dogwood flower. So we've got the dogwood at the bottom, and then we've got some Latin up here. So it says Splendor Sine Occasu. That's our provincial motto or slogan, and that translates to splendor without diminishment, or kind of more simply, never-ending beauty. So if you see on our license plate, it says beautiful British Columbia, this is where it comes from. We've got this elk up here, that's to symbolize the old colony of Vancouver Island, and then the ram on the other side to symbolize the colony of the mainland. So they used to be separate, and then they came together to form British Columbia as a whole province. And then finally, up at the top, we've got this helmet-like looking structure with the crown on top, and then the little lion, and then the crown on top of that. So that is to symbolize our connection to the monarchy. So here in Canada, we're what's called an independent sovereign nation. So what that means is that the crown, or the king, is more of a symbol in our province than a physical active role, but we do still have a few ties, mainly being through the roles of the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor General. And so if you're unfamiliar, the Lieutenant Governor, they are our direct provincial representative of the Crown, and then the Governor General, it's the same exact thing except for all of Canada. So we'll talk about those roles and what they actually mean throughout the rest of the tour, so keep those names in your mind. Any questions? Beautiful. So we talked about the building being 127 years old, but it's very important to acknowledge the people who have been living on these lands for thousands of years before then. So I'd like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen-speaking peoples on whose historical territory we're on right now. They're also known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And so the next thing we'll take a look at is this canoe that we've got right here in the center. So if you folks wouldn't mind, let's make a big circle around the canoe, and we'll talk a bit about it. This canoe actually has a name. Its name is Schweditoskal. That's in the language Halkamail, and it means a safe place to cross the river. And so why that name was chosen, it's supposed to represent us all being in the same canoe of life, paddling together towards a brighter future, or working towards a brighter future. Now this canoe, it was carved and painted by our very first Indigenous Lieutenant Governor here in British Columbia, His name is Stephen Point, and the story behind it is about 15 years ago, and he was down at Ross Bay Beach, maybe eating his sandwich for lunch, but then he looked down at the log that he was sat on and realized it was in a bit of an interesting shape. It had some potential to be carved into a canoe, and so he investigated further, he flipped it over, and realized that someone had the exact same idea and had already started to carve it into a canoe. So we recently looked into when this initial carving would have happened, it actually would have been around 500 years ago. So there's lots of history to it. He wanted to finish the job, so he had it brought up to Government House. That is the local residences of the Lieutenant Governor here in Victoria. And he finished carving and painting it, and then gifted it back here to the Legislative Assembly as a gift for all British Columbians and visitors to enjoy. Now that's why it's on display. Now we had some people from Abbotsford, right? Is anyone in this group familiar with Cultus Lake? Cultus Lake, we know, yeah, perfect. So what the canoe is kind of carved and painted to look like is the lake monster that lives at the bottom of Cultus Lake named Schlockham. So you might be familiar with the the Loch Ness Monster, where I'm from in the Okanagan. We have the Ogopogo. But here we've got Schlockham. So you've got the big yellow eyes at the front, the scales down the back, and then that artwork in the center, that's familial artwork that's dedicated to Stephen Elflane's father. So also one little thing too, down here below, we've got some of the original hand-laid Italian mosaic tiling. So this is all that was able to be preserved down in this lower floor, but we'll see a lot more of it up in the upper rotunda where we're headed next. Alrighty, if you folks just want to trickle in a little bit more, we'll fill the space. It's ours for the next 10 minutes. Alrighty, it looks like most of us have made it upstairs now. So, welcome to the upper rotunda. This rotunda, it's also sometimes called the Memorial Rotunda. And that's because if you look around, there are many plaques and some swords and medals, and those are all dedicated to the British Columbian soldiers who fought in the First and Second World Wars, along with the Korean War, the Spanish Civil War, and there are a few other memorials around the room as well. Now some other significant parts of this room, we've got these 4 massive murals in the top 4 corners. So these murals are not actually original to the building. They were painted by a man named George Southwell in the year 1936. And then they were later installed in 1952, and their intention is to illustrate the 4 major industries of British Columbia. So if we start over here, we've got forestry, and then we've got fishing, then we've got farming, and then above my head right here, we've got mining. We've also got these 3 flags on display, so we'll start off with this one. I'm sure we're all familiar with this. We've seen it once or twice before. Our Canadian flag, it was actually adopted in 1965. And how they selected the design was through a contest. So, of course, this was the design that was selected. The red is supposed to represent the British, the white to represent the French. And then the interesting thing is the 2 strips of red on either side are supposed to symbolize the oceans that are on either side of our country. But we do, of course, have the ocean on top of our country that isn't represented. So it's kind of interesting. Just over here, this flag is called the White Ensign. So this is our old naval flag. It was flown on our ships in the First and Second World Wars. And then finally, just up here, so this flag is called the Queen's Color. Now this flag, it was awarded to Canada after the Battle of Vimy Ridge in the First World War. So that happened up in northern France. And essentially why it was so significant for Canada is it was the very first time where we were seen fighting independently under our own flag and not under the British flag. So that's why we're awarded this one. Now probably the most significant part of this room are these 2 doors right here. So this is our ceremonial entrance, and it can only be used by heads of state. So do any of you know the head of the state? So King Charles is our head of state, so if he were to visit, he would use this entrance. It can also be used by representatives of heads of state, so that would be the Lieutenant Governor or Governor General. It can be used by invited other heads of states of other countries. as well as notable members of the First Nations communities when coming to discuss treaties and such. I would be lying, though, if I said it's never been used by someone other than a head of state or their representatives, because there was one time in history where it was used by someone else. That was way back in 1947, and the people that it was used by were 200 children as they were protesting the price of chocolate here in British Columbia. So essentially it's called the Great Candy Bar Strike. And what was happening is that the price of a chocolate bar in British Columbia was being raised from 5 cents per bar to 8 cents per bar. So this was a really big deal. There were 200 kids out on the front lawns with their protest signs. And additionally, someone had forgotten to lock those doors. So these kids were actually able to run throughout the building, cause some chaos. Unfortunately, they weren't successful in lowering the price of the chocolate bar back down to 5 cents. But this act, it was seen as very radical at the time, so their story was heard. You could actually see a diminishment in profit from chocolate bar sales here in Victoria following this protest. And of course, we still talk about them today, so they definitely left an impact. Do you folks have any questions about anything you're seeing up here, anything we covered, anything we didn't cover? Perfect, alrighty. So we'll move on then. We'll head through these gates and take a look at our legislative chamber. There's opportunities for debates, and then finally it's put up for a vote. And if the vote goes through, that is when the Lieutenant Governor will visit and royal assent will be given. And so that's how a bill can become a law. Now, how royal assent is given, it's so simple. In fact, I can actually teach you how to do it. So it's a specialty I provide on my tours. So to start off, for royal assent, you'll just look up at the ceiling. Perfect. And then look down at your toes. And that's it. There you go. Good job. Quick learners. So that begs the question, though, can royal descent be given? Can they say no? Yes. So this is one of the biggest powers of the Lieutenant Governor, but it's a power that they very, very rarely use. So it's only been used once in Canada in the past 100 years. It was in the 1950s, and it was actually in Alberta. And the reason why they said no is because they were trying to create a law that would allow them to have their own form of currency. And so because currency, that's a federal issue, not a provincial one, that's why no was said. But other than that, it's very, very rarely used. The second thing they'll do in the chamber is discuss provincial finances or budgets. Typically they focus on healthcare and education, but of course there are a few other things. And then the third thing that they'll do is what's called scrutinizing the government. So to scrutinize the government, it's to ask questions of them, to hold them accountable for their actions. And this is probably most on display during what's called question period. So question period, it's 30 minutes every single day the House is sitting, where the opposition, so if you're looking inside the chamber, they sit on this side. It's currently the Conservative Party, the Green Party, the One BC Party, and then there's one independent member. And they're allowed to ask any questions they have of the current ruling government. So they sit on that side of the chamber. It's currently the NDP, or the New Democratic Party. And the leader of the NDP, he is our Premier, his name is David Key. Now, question period, it's often kind of one of the most interesting things to see inside the chamber. If you are ever in town when the House is in session, you're more than welcome to visit and actually sit up inside the chamber. So the chairs aren't in right now, they're kind of being maintained, but typically they have a bunch of wooden seats up there, and you're more than welcome to visit and watch any sessions happening inside the chamber. And why it's so interesting, why question period is so interesting, is because you'll often see the opposition getting very passionate about the questions they're asking. Sometimes you'll see them banging on their desks. Sometimes there's some shouting a bit. And so that brings me to the role of the speaker. So if we're looking in the chamber, way down at the back, we've got that big black chair. So that is our speaker's chair. And the speaker, they're elected in when there's a new government in place. And while they're in their robes and in that chair, they're neutral or non-partisan. They don't participate in debates, and essentially they're there to make sure that the members are following the rules. So if it is getting a little out of hand, you'll see our current speaker, the Honorable Raj Chauhan, sometimes shushing members, reminding them to have patience with each other. Now, one of my favorite stories about the building is that our speaker's chair was actually stolen once. It was stolen back in the 1970s by the University of British Columbia engineers. And so essentially there are multiple theories about how they pulled off this heist, but there was lots of construction happening to the building, and so somehow they were able to get the chair out of the building, onto a truck, onto the ferry, and then across the ferry over to campus in Vancouver, and they were holding the chair for ransom. And asking for a donation to the Vancouver Children's Hospital. So it was out of good heart. The donation, it was made. The chair was eventually returned, but the cheeky thing is actually still to this day, if you were to look underneath our speaker's chair, you would see UBC engineers carved into the bottom of the wood. So they left their mark. Do you folks have any questions about anything inside the chamber, how anything works? Perfect. All right. One final thing while we're up here, we've got these beautiful stained glass windows on either side. So these windows are all original to the building. They were created in Leeds in the United Kingdom. And so these ones up here, they're called the Arts and Sciences series. So they're heavily inspired by ancient Greek and Roman industries. And our best guess at their kind of intention of being in this members lobby is to remind the members on their way into the chamber of the different types of people that they're serving. So that's why you'll see those different industries: navigation, commerce, agriculture, etc. So we'll see more from the same company in the stairwells, and then downstairs at the Diamond Jubilee window as well, where we're headed next. So you can follow me. We're going to head down this way. Yeah. We're just going to get started over here, and we'll work our way back over there as the tour goes on. Alrighty. So to start off with the window that I have behind me. So like I mentioned, it was made by the same company as those windows upstairs. The company is called Powell Brothers Limited. So this window, it's our Diamond Jubilee window, and it was created to celebrate Queen Victoria's 60th year of reign. But it's got a little bit of a funny history to it. So we talked about the library being added to the building in the year 1912. And so prior to then, the building, it had a bit of a flatter back. There was two massive exit doors, and then this window was on display over top of that. But of course, when they started the construction and the addition of the library, they had to take the window down, and they didn't want any damage to occur to it when this construction was happening, so they tucked it away in the basement for safekeeping, and then they forgot about it for 62 years. So it went unseen. It wasn't rediscovered until 1975, and then that is when it was put on display here in the Hall of Honor for us to enjoy. So that's why you can tell it isn't quite meant for this location, just that curved archway, how it's sticking out, unlike the Golden Jubilee window on the other side that was actually made for this location. Alright, our next stop on this journey, we're just going to take a look over here at the women's wall. So actually, we don't have to move. Essentially this wall, it was created in 2017, and it was to celebrate the 100th year anniversary of women being able to vote in British Columbia. Now that being said, not all women or Canadians could vote in the year 1917. It wasn't actually until the year 1952 when all Canadians had the right to vote. But this law in particular is created to celebrate the first within the female community of government, specifically here in BC. So something that's really exciting to share is that this current government we have, it's the very first time in British Columbian history, but also Canadian history, where more than 50% of the members are female. So we're currently at 53%, which is a long way from where we started. Actually, if we move to the other side of the wall, we'll take a look at where we started. So this is from the year 1918, and it was when Mary Ellen Smith, so the very first female MLA, was elected in British Columbia. So kind of the really cool thing is that it was only 1 year after women could vote in BC that she was elected in. And this is like maybe a little bit surprising how quickly it happened, but so she was from Vancouver, so it does make sense, a bit of a bigger city. It would have been a bit more progressive back in the day. But yeah, this photo is quite interesting because you've got Mary Ellen Smith just in the center with her large hat, drowning in the ocean of bow ties and mustaches. But essentially there are so many inspiring women on this wall. We could talk for hours, but we've only got about 10 more minutes left, or actually 8 more minutes left on the tour, so I've selected a few for us to cover. So starting here, we've got Nancy Hodges. So she was the first female elected speaker here in British Columbia. She was elected in the year 1950. Right here, so we've got Rosemary Brown. She was the first black woman who was ever a member here in British Columbia. That was in the year 1972, and she was kind of instrumental in fighting for a lot of women's rights here in BC. So she's received several kind of noteworthy awards, both on the provincial level, but also on the national level for her activism and work. Next up, we've got Judy Tialki down here. So she was the first Indo-Canadian woman elected as a member in BC. That was in the year 1991. And the really cool thing about her is she's actually the youngest member who's ever been elected in British Columbia. She was only 26 years old. So that's pretty cool. And also, an interesting fact is that she was the first member to give birth within her 4 years working as a member here in BC. So also kind of interesting. Finally, we've got Ida Zhang, and then on the other side we've got Jenny Kwan. So they were the first Chinese-Canadian women elected as members here in British Columbia. And when we speak about this wall, it sometimes is surprising how recent so much of this history has occurred. So on this wall, actually, the most recent one, it was in 2016. It's a photo of Melanie Mark. So she was the very first First Nations woman who was ever elected here as a member in British Columbia. And these firsts, they are still continuing to happen, and you'll see it with the female community of government, as well as for other communities such as the LGBTQ+ community of government. So this is our women's wall. Our final stop on the tour is just right here at our Golden Jubilee window. So this window was created in 2002, and it's to celebrate Queen Elizabeth's 50th year of reign. And it was a really exciting time for the building when this window was installed and unveiled, because the Queen herself visited to unveil it. So we have photos of her. She stood right in front of that pillar, and she pushed the button, and then it revealed itself. It was created by 2 local Victoria stained glass artists. So their names are Edward Schaefer and Tom Mercer, and they wanted to include as many natural resources or provincial icons into the window as possible. So down at the bottom, pardon me, they've actually used real pieces of jade in the window. So these little green pieces, as well as we've got all these animals that are very commonly found in British Columbia. So this one right here, it's our provincial fish. Do any of you know what our provincial fish is? Salmon, yeah, exactly. And then up at the top, that is our provincial bird. This one's a little trickier. Does anyone know the name of our provincial bird? Any guesses? So it's called the Steller's Jay. So now you know a new fun fact. So the Steller's Jay, that is the provincial bird of British Columbia. Do you folks have any kind of final pressing questions while we're here? Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you so much for sticking with me for the past 40 minutes. And now I will take you to the very, very final stop on the tour, and that would be the gift shop and the exit. So if you'll follow me this way, we'll take a look at that.